Let's just choose. Okay. A pleasant good morning. My name is Celine Smith, Project Coordinator for the Caribbean Future Forum. Welcome to another Carib Web Dialogue. This is a new series of webinars that focuses on the SDGs and you. It looks at the Sustainable Development Goals and their relevance to the Caribbean region and how we as a region can achieve these goals. Today, we're again focusing on environmental sustainability in the Caribbean region. Those of you who have been following us would have seen our past webinars on this, and for those of you who haven't, you can go to our YouTube channel, Caribbean Future Forum, to watch any of our past webinars. Here with us today, we're pleased to have Dr. Richard Byron Cox of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and Professor Valerie Stout, who's a program professor for environmental studies at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. It's my pleasure being here. I'm honored.
So we do have our speakers' biographies uploaded to our website, so you can feel free to go there, check out the biographies in the interest of time. I won't read them for you. And just before handing over first to Dr. Byron Cox, I would like to remind you to stay up to date with our activities on our Facebook page, Caribbean Future Forum, our website, CaribbeanFutureForum.com, and our YouTube channel. Of course, please feel free throughout this webinar to submit your questions, or your comments through the Q&A box that you will see below your screen. So now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Richard Byron Cox.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor and a pleasure for me to be here. Before I go on, I want to thank UNDP and Ms. Smith for having me. I also want to thank my friend Valerie, Professor Stout, for being here with me. I mean, a good friend of mine. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the issue of the Sustainable Development Goals and its relevance to the Caribbean has to do with one fundamental issue, and only one, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of what they are, how many they are, what the targets are, anyone can find this on the internet. It's a very simple thing to do. It takes 2 clicks to do that, right? How they came about, you might have to do a little bit of reading, of course, but that again is easily found on the internet. There's nothing sensational about that. There's nothing new about that. There's nothing special about that. So what is this fundamental issue then that I'm talking about? The fundamental issue is basically people. I am convinced that for sustainable development and for us to meet the challenges of sustainable development in the Caribbean today, we have to have a people-centered development. What do I mean by that? What do I mean is that, firstly, the people have got to be aware as to what is sustainable development, what it's all about. That is the first thing. The second thing is why. In other words, it's one thing to know, this is what this is about, but why is it important? That's the second thing. The third thing is not only how can I be involved, but that I must be involved. Unless we get to those 3 things, what it is about, why it is important, and how we get involved, then we're going no place. But the most important things is still to come, which is I must get involved. In other words, it's not so much that I should get involved or I need to get involved, but that I must get involved. If we do not do this in the Caribbean, we're going to have a problem. Now, let us deal with things from a concrete standpoint. As you all would know, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and each goal has a series of targets. There are 169 targets in all. But what does this mean in real terms for the Caribbean? Well, let me explain to you what it means in real terms for the Caribbean. If you look at the Caribbean today, over the last, say, 5, 10 years, you would see that the storms are increasing. There was something called left-handed Lenny in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which came not across from the Atlantic, off the African coast, but the other way around. This has not happened in more than 200 years. How do you explain that? That's the issue. No, let us make it even more simple. Think of this. St. Vincent is a very small island, so is Grenada, and so is Trinidad and Tobago. Comparatively speaking to St. Vincent and Grenada, Trinidad is big, but Trinidad has more than 1.5 million people. Now, think of this. If you lose 100,000 acres of good land in a place like Brazil, it's really nothing. Brazil is a huge country. If you lose 100 acres of very good land in Trinidad and Tobago, you already have a problem. But think of what that means in a place like St. Vincent. So the point is this. Is it the land that is important? Is it protecting the land that is important? Or is it something more important than all of that, which would lead to that? And my argument is that the people being aware of the importance of the land, the people being aware that they need to protect the land, comes even before the land itself. That is my argument. So my argument is based on these 4 things, as I said before. 1, being aware as to what sustainable development really is. 2, you understanding the need for it. 3, how you can play a part. But 4, actually playing your part. So let us continue. Today in the Caribbean, as I speak, as we sit here, by the time I'm finished, at least, well, by the time we are finished, sorry, at least 3 species would have disappeared from the planet for good. Now, you might wonder, well, what does this have to do with me? And how does that in any way, shape or form influences the development of the Caribbean? Now, I read someplace some time ago, a long time ago, that if all the human beings on this planet disappeared, the only thing that would happen is that nature would create the built-up environment. In other words, trees would start to grow out of buildings and so on and finally destroy them, but nothing else would change. However, if all the bees on this planet disappear, pollination would start to take place and we would starve to death, ultimately. Think of that for a moment. So the point, therefore, is that people need to be educated about these things, understand these very elementary truths if we are to get involved in the sustainable development process. So I think the issue of awareness has now been addressed by me, meaning that you understand that a simple thing, for example, like pollination and the role of bees in that is so important to the very future of the Caribbean. So the awareness business is important, but why do you need to know about it? Well, if you don't know about it, you will never act. Now let us take another concrete situation. In Trinidad and Tobago, you have 3 mountain ranges. You have the Northern Mountain Range, the Central Mountain Range, and the Southern Mountain Range. Now, this effectively divides the country into 3 basic areas. You might not know this, so I will tell you that basically, environmentally speaking, the Northern Range is what feeds the rest of Trinidad and Tobago, environmentally speaking. And that's a fact. Now, if we do not understand that we need to protect this today, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, probably 50 years down the road, we are going to find ourselves in a serious catastrophe. I'm not here to talk to you about highfalutin things and to talk to you about atmospheric things. I'm here to talk to you concretely, to tell you in reality that that Northern Range and everything that is in there needs to be protected. Now, listen to me and listen to me carefully. 150 years ago, Haiti had the most productive soils anywhere in the entire Caribbean. Today, if you fly over what is called Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the Dominican Republic together, right? You would see one part is brown and the other part is green. And you question why? Well, let me tell you why. It is because Haiti has been so deforested, all the trees have been chopped down, that today you find Haiti is the only true desert or desertified place in the entire Caribbean as we know it, the only one. And this is human action. So this is why you need to know. This is why you need to know. But let's go on. So we're talking about why you need to know. Let me tell you something. There's a place in the Caribbean called Grenada. And Grenada is made up of 3 islands, basically. It's Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Now, Carriacou is where my father was born. And on Carriacou, years and years ago, Carriacou was the boat building center of the Eastern Caribbean. All the wooden boats were built on Carriacou. And listen to this. This was so because they had all the forest there. So they chopped down the trees and they built the boats. In those days, Carriacou had 2 rivers. That is geologically proven. Today, there's no river in Carriacou. Guess why? I suppose you know the answer. So this is why you need to know. And if we continue this way, of course, our development cannot be sustainable. That's impossible. So we have answered the question as why you need to know. Good. So now that we know that you need to know, and the other question is therefore that, well, you need to act. I suppose the first 2 parts of it is already clear to you, but let me make something very clear to you, very, very clear. A lot of people in the Caribbean today, including governments, politicians, and so on and so forth, go about preaching that people need to act, So we need to do this, including me. We need to do that, and we need to do, but we never do anything. There is a fundamental difference between knowing that you need to act and actually acting. Okay? So the thing here is this, that I didn't come to frighten you, but sometimes frightening you helps you to understand what we need to do. So the long and short of it is this, that you have to come to the conclusion, you have to come to the understanding that while Eric was right, that oil don't spoil, you can't drink oil, You have to drink water. And listen to me carefully. Regardless of who you are, what you are, how rich you are, securing your future has to do with securing 3 things: the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the food you eat in the Caribbean. You see, in Europe here, where I live, you also need some clothes because winter could kill you. You understand? You could freeze to death. But in the Caribbean, you could go about naked. So those 3 basic things, regardless of how rich you are necessary: air, water, and food. And they come from the environment. No amount of money, no amount of oil can give you that. So you understand now that you need to act. So we go to the 4th part. How do you act? That is the fundamental issue. Now, we have a lot of bright people in the Caribbean, these politicians and so on. Yeah, man, they know everything. They could tell everybody everything, But yet you wonder, if these people are so bright, how we still end up in the mess that we end up in today? You have to ask yourself that question. So how do we act? We act on 4 bases. The first is that we act knowingly. In other words, in an informed manner. So we need to get the information. That's the first one. The second, we act in unison, in unity. The politicians always like us to believe that them alone know, only them know. And you have some intellectuals as well. I'm not talking to Professor Valerie Stout. I know how different they compete. But there are some intellectuals who are trying to tell you that they know it all too, And they have all the answers. That is also not correct. And then you have some NGO people who want to fight the government, and the government want to fight them. So you have a whole big problem here. You understand? That is not the way. To act in unison means all of us together. So we come to the third part of it, which is the most important part. Our action must be people-centered. What do I mean by that? People will be acting, and people are acting for people. And people are acting with people. And finally, as regards how we act, we must act with vision. I just discussed with you the story of Haiti and how it came to where it's at today. We can't be acting only for today. We can't be acting in a short-sighted manner. We have to act with vision. And this is where institutions like the University of Trinidad and Tobago comes into play. So in other words, there have to be a public space where all of us come together. The politician, the NGO, the intellectuals, and of course the bureaucrats like myself and so on, who might have something to say. I think I will stay here for now. And I am open for any questions on concrete issues of the SDGs or their targets and so on. I can explain all of that. But as I say, that is easily found on the internet. What I wanted to bring across in this short expose of mine is the central element that this is about people. People being aware, people knowing, people acting to get this thing done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Byron Cox. So now what I'm going to do is hand over to Professor Valerie Stout, who would share a bit from UTT's perspective.
Well, I am almost sorry to have stopped listening to Richard. I so enjoyed what he had to say. On the one hand, and as usual, when Richard speaks, he frightens me. And I hope he has frightened the people who are listening. Because when he sticks his hand up and he says, listen, listen to me now, it is because something very powerful is coming after, something that we really, really, really need to listen to. When I thought of coming here and I realized I was going to be using a PowerPoint presentation, along with vision, I like visualizing. So what I did was I asked myself what I as an individual would want out of my quality of life. And of course, my mind went to the environment first, because it is our context. And then I thought about the economy. And once you're in the economy, you think of employment. That's it on a micro level. On a macro level, you want the government to have enough money to provide us with the infrastructure that we need. Then I thought of education, equality, a lot of ease. And then, of course, health. I had a right to put health earlier. The point I'm making is, when you think like that as to what you, the individual, wants, another E would be aesthetics. I don't know whether the whole concept of aesthetics is overt in the Sustainable Development Goals. I don't think it is. But just think of you yourself, whether you want to be surrounded by filth. So now when you start to visualize, you have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And Dr. Byron Cox is correct in that we are not here today to instruct you in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals or the 169 targets. They're all interwoven. So he's right, we must act. And within that, leaping home, I would like to take this brief opportunity to talk about what the University of Trinidad and Tobago is doing. Now, first of all, we have to ask ourselves, what is the University of Trinidad and Tobago? It is the national institution. And it is very, very important to the University of Trinidad and Tobago that it remains relevant. I feel very strongly about that, and every single person in Trinidad and Tobago, every resident, every citizen should feel the same way, because the University of Trinidad and Tobago is supported by taxpayers' money. So we're all stakeholders, whether we are employed there or we are simply a member of the public. Even the Caribbean should look to all of its tertiary institutions to provide what the Caribbean needs. So with that in mind, and bearing in mind some of the things that Richard said, we have a lot of areas, when I was thinking about it, that, and we are carrying out activities that do not just target environmental sustainability, but also penetrate into some of the other goals. We, of course, have an environmental studies department or program under which we have a taught master's program, and there's a small research project in there. But we have research students looking at things like mapping pollution. And again, why map pollution? Because it impacts on your environment. It impacts on the air you breathe. It impacts on your ability to get potable water, as Richard mentioned. So, and it impacts on your food. So we measure and map pollution. But we also, in all the spheres, we look in the oceans, we look on the coasts, in the mangroves, we look on land in the rivers, that would be the hydrosphere. We look in the air. We have a project now where we are modeling air pollution along the west coast of Trinidad at centers leading from Point Lisas all the way through Port of Spain, ending, let's say, just beyond the John Donaldson Technical Institute. We are looking at another project where we are trying to reduce greenhouse gases, which again, we didn't bring it up overtly here, but when Richard spoke of 3 species disappearing by the time we are done, this is being attributed to climate change and loss of biodiversity because of what is happening in the environment. So in looking to mitigate greenhouse gases, which have been tagged as, let's say, some of the triggers for the climate actions, climate changes we are seeing, it's important to look at ways of not just reducing, but also after something is produced, being able to undo a little bit of what has been done. So we have a project that we are starting on looking to remove greenhouse gases. We also, and this is the Marine Sciences Department now, we have people who are looking at mangrove rehabilitation. Mangroves don't just protect the land, and this is important for all SIDS, which is small island developing states. Well, Trinidad is also a SID, although we are no longer developing state, we're now purportedly developed. But mangroves are important because they protect your inner land, and they also provide a lot of oxygen to the atmosphere, which again is important. Richard's comment, we need to breathe, we need to eat. So we have mangrove rehabilitation. We are also looking, and this is the part of this is the aesthetics. We're looking at protecting our reefs, our coral reefs. Again, the marine sciences people do that. Coming back to environmental studies, we are also looking, besides mapping pollution, and then once you know that, you are able to do something about it. We have also developed, we are also very interested in outreach, in building the same awareness that Richard talked about. And I provided Katie with a little PowerPoint presentation which outlines generally what we as individuals do to harm the environment and how we can stop doing that. Little things, just little actions, and every individual holds that responsibility. So we are very big into awareness, and we're also big into performance assessment. So what we have developed in the environmental studies program here is, well, again, a multivariate statistical method. It sounds highfalutin, but where it is important is that it gives you a way of measuring your progress. If you're really going to take action, especially on a state level, you need to know that what you're doing is working. But you also need to be able to get down to the public, and that is the awareness. And then you need to evaluate if you're penetrating to the public. The other thing we're working on, and again, this is in agricultural science in our BAFT unit at ECIAF, is food security. We have one of our crop scientists working on adding sargassum, which is seaweed, to soil to improve the growth, and we have had some good success there. And we have, and what it does, it also deals with that ISO, that is seaweed. Many of us who were here last year, July, August, we know what happened in Tobago, we know what happened at some of the beaches in Trinidad, where it was just overrun with seaweed. No business could be conducted, fishermen couldn't fish, the economy. So there is that. We are in our environmental engineering program, which is part of the civil engineering program. We are looking at water treatment, different ways of improving water treatment, and this again speaks to potable water, which you want to drink. So we are working on it. Everything that Richard has said, we are working on. We are working on better air by knowing what is there, knowing what is polluting. We are working on better water, getting potable water easier. We're also looking at some renewables, and I think one of the places that UTT will be focusing very soon is getting what is called resource maps, looking at our renewable energies, like can we get energy from wind, can we get energy from sun. But before we can do all of that, we need to map our resources just as if they were oil, and say what we have where. And after that, we can really get into the business of diversifying, and again, this is good economic growth, away from oil and gas to cleaner energy, another sustainable development goal, and looking to boosting our agriculture. So food security, potable water, what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe. UTT is doing it all. I believe I may be, let me know when I'm out of time, because I could go on. Oh, great, then I can go on. It is my pleasure to go on. According to Richard, I'm honored to go on. Yes, so again, to go back, what we have been finding, and unfortunately, we are not involved in remediating land yet. We are involved in rehabilitating, but if land is polluted at this point, UTT is not yet capable of going in there and saying, okay, I will clean this up. But what we are capable of doing is measuring whether remediation efforts have worked. And again, I place a lot of store as someone who heads an environmental studies program in measuring, mapping, monitoring, because when you do research in the environment, it's not a one and done. There has got to be continuous monitoring, continuous measuring, because you want to be able to tell what is changing. Have I lost this species? Have I gained an invasive species? You know, what is happening to my forest? What is happening to my rivers, my oceans? What is happening to my reefs? The reefs offer so much beauty, and that is why I said the aesthetics are important. What is happening to our beaches? In that PowerPoint presentation that I gave to Kadeen, which she will upload on the website, we see what happened to Coffee Beach in 2013. Coffee Beach is in La Brea. It's right here in Trinidad. And we see up close and personal what happens. We see what up close and personal what happens when we quarry indiscriminately, how our eyesight's are offended. So it's about what we breathe, what we drink, being sure to have something to eat. But it's also about looking around and enjoying. I looked out of the window and on Sunday, after that awful rainfall, and looked at all that lush greenery, admittedly among the houses. But I felt such joy at seeing that. And I stopped to say, thank God. One, for being able to see it, and two, for being there. So it's also about what we eat, what we breathe, what we drink, but it's also about what we see. And this is why, as much as we want as individuals and can act to relieve the amount of pollution, air pollution we do by irresponsible consumption, abuse of electricity, abuse of gas, we also need to look in Trinidad and Tobago, especially at our solid waste. Because it is important to the soul to be in clean surroundings. You know, maybe some of the other things are far removed from our eyesight, but not hundreds of plastic bottles and every kind of filth you can imagine on a beach where you are thinking of going to bathe. So if we want to enjoy what nature has provided us with, we have to care for it. We have to care for our environment. We have to teach the next generation a certain amount of responsibility, and while we did some critical thinking, so that they realize it's not just about the two-thumb texting. It's not about lying on Facebook. It's not about tweeting. See what has happened to Donald Trump. It's about stopping, thinking, being a little bit less selfish, understanding that. And another thing about the environment, which I want to get in, with something like acid rain, for example. Acid rain happens when certain air pollutants, what are called the SOxes, sulfur dioxide, sulfur trioxide, NOxes, go into the air from usually industrial outputs. The irony of it is acid rain, because the air moves like this, the air currents, this is advection, and then it falls as rain, which is convection. Acid rain does not fall where the pollutants are released into the environment. So in other words, you pollute at A, but you spoil B. And acid rain will etch your car. It has destroyed a lot of the statues in Italy. It destroys buildings because it attacks anything with a calcium base. So, but I mean, who wants to be driving a car etched because it's acidic? And I think this happened in the Hilton Hotel in Tobago. I don't want to speak out of turn, but so the thing about it is we have to have responsible consumption and responsible production. I believe this is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, 15 or one of them, 12. So essentially, when you think about what kind of citizen you want to be, except for the fact that, as I said, I don't see aesthetics moved in there. You could essentially think of all the Sustainable Development Goals. You don't want to be hungry. You don't want poverty. You want good health. You want a quality education. You want good economy, a good job. You want clean air, or clean water, clean energy, which essentially is clean air. You want, as I said, they have entrepreneurship and innovation, life under the sea, life above the sea, and also communities. This is something else that we're doing at UTT, incidentally. And that is, we want to focus in our outreach on building climate resilience in our coastal and riverine communities. That is, these communities who have risen up near to rivers and on beaches, again, like Coffee Beach. We want to go into those communities and prepare them, have them put some sort of action plan in place so that they become resilient. What resilience means is not that you can stop what is happening, but that your recovery when it does happen is better. Your ability to bend but not break. So this is a project, and it's not research per se. It really is about giving back, which is something, again, we are mandated to do at UTT, but that we really want to do as people with a soul. So making sure that these people are protected, that our communities are protected, because then what happens? I personally cannot enjoy myself, whether it is a movie or a meal, if I am looking at a picture of somebody in water up to their knees because of a flood, or in oil up to their knees, and they're looking into the camera with painful eyes. That impacts on my enjoyment. And I would like to enjoy whatever I can enjoy. So the thing about it is we must be our brother's keeper. And if we are, we will understand immediately that to do that, it is important to protect the environment. So on that note, I believe I've used up my time and I don't want to go over. I just want to re-emphasize that when I looked at all of the sustainable development goals, I realized that at UTT, I was happy to realize in several areas, as I said, in environmental studies, in marine sciences, even in maritime sciences, in environmental engineering, in the civil engineering part, in our energy institute, and again, very, very importantly, in our agricultural studies, our crop sciences. We're also looking, incidentally, we have put out this large survey and are now processing the results on going to a particularly locally grown bhaji and looking at understanding the potential for introducing it. And this again speaks to food security. So two of the efforts, this whole business about using sargassum, which I understand from the scientist involved, who is Dr. Marcus Ramdwa, is his experiments are going very, very well, and the plants seem to love being in sargassum. So not only does it get rid of that eyesore, but it bodes well for our agricultural sector. And last but not least, now the GATE has taken a new twist. The sponsorship, the ability to get an education, is very much contingent on doing something that is aligned with the national development goals. So this whole idea of UTTs to always have relevance, and relevance is not just about producing work-ready graduates, which is a bit of part of relevance, but relevance is also about looking into the natural environment or looking into the society. Actually, I take the society above and looking for the problems, whether it is in education, where we do have some research looking at new innovative methods of providing quality education, but looking into our society and solving the problems that we see there. So again, whether it's in the environment, it's in health, we have a health project going where we're mapping at the cardiovascular propensities in Trinidad and Tobago among different ethnic groups, etc. We're trying to see if there is anything here that tells us what will predispose someone to cardiovascular disease. So we have had a large study going and we're just wrapping that up. I'm very pleased with that. At the end of that, we will be able to articulate some insights and at the same time make some recommendations about what people can do, you know, by taking these risk factors out of their lives then. So again, that's biomedical engineering, I've covered civil engineering, maritime, marine, environmental studies, agriculture, energy studies, and I think that's about it. And then of course we also have the parts that speak to the aesthetic, animation, the performing arts, cultural studies, because without culture, that is part of sustainable development too, protecting your culture, understanding it, studying it, understanding lessons learned. So it's a holistic pattern of attack. And as I said, I'm pleased to say that the UTT programs are targeting the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay, thank you so much. And just while we're on that, I'm going to read one of the comments or questions that we got already, and it's, can you provide a contact for the projects on Saga Zone? The person is interested in forging regional collaboration for processing of the seaweed dumped on beaches. So I don't know if you can provide contact.
Yes, I could provide it.
By email.
I will provide it via email because I don't want to give out somebody's email address. Yes, so absolutely I can provide it.
By email.
I'll be happy to, because I think we have to tackle Sargassum as a cooperative, not as a competitive, but as a cooperative action. So I'll be very, very happy to do that.
Okay, great. So let me just go on to some of the other questions.
So I take it you have provided my email address, so the person can email me and then I can.
I'll provide you with this.
Okay, all right, good. Then I will send it, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Before you go on, if I may comment here, because I think this is a crucial learning moment for all of us here. Hello? Yeah, you would. Now, you see, this sarcasm business, or whatever it is called, affects everybody. I was in St. Vincent and in St. Lucia and saw what is happening with the sea there. Now, what Professor Stout has just said is something that is fundamental to the Caribbean and to sustainable development. We must understand that you cannot and you will not achieve sustainable development in any part of the Caribbean unless we do it together. It is impossible to build an island of prosperity in an ocean of desperation. That is impossible. So therefore, it amazes me that the Caribbean politicians, and I'm not trying to be critical here, but this is just fact, that the Caribbean politicians went about setting out an economic space, okay? The Caribbean community is an economic space, you know, without thinking about an environmental space first and foremost. It is impossible to discuss sustainable development without the environment. You could discuss any kind of development without the environment, but once you put that word sustainable in front of the word development, you have to deal with the environment. And it is a ridiculous sort of foolish thing, actually, to create an economic space and don't think about the sustainable development and therefore the environmental space. And the Caribbean government have put the horse before the cart in this case. And you can tell them I say so because it is true. Now, what the professor is pointing out here, and which is important to understand, which is very, very important to understand, we cannot anymore go forward in our development process as merely a competitive sort of operation. You understand? It must be a cooperative operation for the Caribbean as a whole. Barbados tried to prove that they could build their island of prosperity in an ocean of desperation. It collapsed. Jamaica tried it, it collapsed. Trinidad tried it, it collapsed. It cannot be done because sustainable development, as the professors pointed out, has so many different linkages. And to bring all of those linkages together, as I said earlier, you need to act in unison. We must understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving into one of the first questions, it's we all want and need decent jobs to live and provide for our families. Jobs depend on nature and natural resources. Our jobs and production processes impact on the environment in various ways. How do you see professions and skills be upgraded for workers and entrepreneurs to be aware and be able to make a favorable contribution for sustainable development?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Professor, do you want to go first?
No, I think that there has to be an overarching plan, but yet a sector by sector plan. Some sectors pollute more than others. So I think it has to be parallel efforts. For example, let's say you have an entrepreneur in fashion and you're trying to get ahead. that person is not necessarily going to be thinking about, when I throw out my scraps, or when I do this, or when I do that, it will be polluting. But there needs to be somebody else. Now, some people, as a matter of fact, in our Fashion Institute, they create clothing with found objects. They certainly accessories with found objects, and that's a big thing now. We have, besides UTT doing it, you know, bracelets, things like that. We have, I believe it's Nature Seekers, we have NGOs who, at one and the same time, 30 Watchers, provide people with jobs fabricating accessories. I know because I bought my staff each bracelet from found materials for Christmas. So that does everything. But what I'm saying is, as an entrepreneur, the person who sent in this comment articulated needs immediately. Depending on where you are, you take it a step at a time. So you're trying to get a job. You're trying to be an entrepreneur. Your first order of business is to put in place the things you need to achieve that. That's where your mind has to go first. But in the process, if you're also aware, as soon as you find your footing, what my father used to call your sea legs, as soon as you find your footing, you start to think about the responsibilities of what you're doing. I don't know that it could be done in a parallel fashion. I'm not an entrepreneur. And when I was much younger, looking for my first job, I wasn't thinking, but then again, I was going into education. I wasn't thinking about the impact of my job on sustainable development, on the environment or sustainable development. Now I think about the impact of my job, because now my job is to promote awareness. But what I'm saying is, the responsibility of everybody is to have this outside awareness of what the impact is of what you do. Initially, as you're trying to establish yourself, that awareness will be all about yourself, your family, trying to get some of the sustainable development goals: no poverty, no hunger, good job and economic growth. Those are 3 of the sustainable development goals. So the sustainable development goals does not say you can't be an entrepreneur because you will pollute. You can't do this because you will pollute. There are several goals and they're intertwined. Your first order of business is always, let's say, to take care of yourself. But if you remain an aware and responsible person, in doing so, you will try your best to have the smallest footprint. This is why people talk about footprints. So all I can say is, as I said, just be aware of what you do. Initially, do what you need to do to protect yourself, to save yourself from hunger, to save yourself from poverty. You know, I would like to not be a single person driver driving from Port of Spain to Arima every day. I would love to be not a single person driver. I would like to take public transportation, and I do sometimes. But I have to then take a maxi taxi to City Gate, from City Gate to Arima, okay? Sometimes wait in City Gate for an hour. And I have to do it sometimes with not just 1, but 2 computers and a handbag. And my particular route has small maxi taxis. I'm a tall person. So it requires sacrifice. I get in my car, I turn on the air conditioner, because I feel if I don't turn on that air conditioner, I will keel over. It is that humid in the morning. But I am perfectly aware, what is it to be? Should I leave my air conditioner? So I have my air conditioner on the lowest level. And I don't use it in the night when I'm coming home. I suffer a little bit. But in the morning, I find I have to use it. Now, is that selfish? Perhaps. What is the alternative? Keeling over the wheel, running into somebody. I think we have to have balance. You know, I go to work and I work often 12 hours and 13 hours. I have reasoned that if I land there spent because I have not used air conditioning on the way up, I don't know that I'm doing anybody a service. So what I will do is try to keep a well-maintained car so I don't have that black exhaust going out.
Yeah.
And keep my air conditioner at the lowest possible level.
Yes. Good tips.
Okay. Yes, in relation to this, well, economic theory teaches you that there's something called creative destruction. What does this mean in economic terms? In economic terms, it means that economically speaking, in the economy, certain sectors would necessarily die so that new creation could come into place. So for example, let's take a very concrete example. 40 years ago, everybody typed everything on a typewriter. Today, you wouldn't really find a typewriter in an office. It's a rare thing. Everybody types things on computers, okay? So the destruction of the typewriter is more or less a creation given room to the computer, okay? So this is natural in economics, in everything. Years ago, it was horse and carriage. Now it's motor cars, okay? And some time ago, it was just flying balloons. Now it's airplanes and so on and so forth. So the point is this, that's the first point, that by its very nature, economics is a dynamic thing. It changes over time. Okay, the things that we used 100 years ago, we don't use them now. And that is the first point we have to understand, that we must not be afraid of creative destruction. What we need to know is that we have to understand creative destruction and manage it, manipulate it, so that whatever is destroyed, whatever jobs are destroyed, new jobs are created, but jobs which are friendly and better for the environment. That's the first part. The second part is this, that we have to have not an extractive relation to the environment anymore as regards economics. We have to have an inclusive relation. What do I mean by that? In other words, in the past, all we thought about was how we could use up the resources of the earth without replenishing them. Okay, we saw the resources of the earth as only for us to use and do what we want. But I don't like to say these figures because I frighten my friend Valerie very often when I state the facts and the figures. You understand? But certain, for example, certain fish stocks have completely collapsed. Completely collapsed. The reason why is because our approach to economics has been totally extractive. As some people basically say, we are only takers. We take, we take, we take. We do not think of how we become inclusive and see the environment as a very part of our own selves. As I have argued earlier, which cannot be disputed, if I may say so, is that regardless of how rich you are, you need three basic things. And they come from the environment. This is air, water, and food. If you chop down all the trees in this world today, all the oxygen has disappeared. Isn't that so? That's quite true. We know that. And regardless of what the food it is, it comes from the land. Now, the statistics would show that averagely speaking, the average human could live a maximum of 6 minutes without air. Okay? 6 minutes without air, 6 days without water, and 60 days without food. That is what the science has proven. So the point, therefore, is this, that we have to now look at jobs in the form of not just extracting from the environment purely, but seeing it as an inclusive sort of thing, that the environment is part and parcel of us. How do we do that concretely? So, for example, in the past where we just took out the oil out of the ground, burn it up, and put more carbon in the air. Today now, we see the sun as part of our energy and we include it in our energy source. So we put panels on our roof and so on, and the sun actually provides the energy. So we have to move away. I know all of this is new to a lot of people because we have not taught about these things, and we are not being taught these things, okay? But the answer to the question has to do with these two fundamental things. The first is that we have to look at, as I said, creative destruction. There are things in our economy now, the burning of fossil fuel is a vicious cycle that is going to lead us worse and worse down the road of climate change and the collapse of the environment. So we have to turn that into a virtuous circle. How do we do that? By this, we need the energy. So now we have, as you know, for example, in Grenada, in St. Lucia, in Dominica, and in St. Vincent, you have a lot of what is called volcanic energy. St. Vincent is now building its first geothermal plant, as you would know. Dominique is also building a geothermal plant, but this is including, you know, this is an inclusive approach to our energy needs rather than just an extractive approach. Okay, so those are the two things I think we need to do. We must not be afraid. We cannot be afraid of creative destruction as regards jobs in the economy, because there's going to be more room for these things. Now, let us take, for example, Trinidad and Tobago and all the oil resources that Trinidad and Tobago has, right? That oil resource can be used to create new technologies because it is money. It generates money. And the professor has now been discussing a lot of what the University of Trinidad and Tobago is doing. And a lot of that, you understand, is financed by the oil money, but it creates other things, from health to education, to awareness, etc., etc. So we have to understand we cannot be afraid. I think that's the problem that the person is driving at here. The fear that, okay, if you're concerned with the environment, then certain jobs would have to go, and certain people will not be employed, and so on and so on. But this is because we do not understand the very history of economics, the nature of economics. It is the nature of economics to be creatively destructive. And ultimately, we have to move from a standpoint of being extractive as regards the environment to being inclusive as regards our economics. That is the answer to the question, in this sense.
All right, thank you so much. And so in the interest of time, I'm just gonna sort of combine two other questions. So it's, how do we manage sustainable use of our natural resources in a declining economy when these methods tend to be more costly? And I'm guessing this is on the individual level. And then what would be the role of CARICOM in the Caribbean Environmental Sustainability Challenge and addressing it?
If I may say, I believe that Dr. Byron Cox answered that first question in what he said just now.
The individual level.
Right, and now I think he can take CARICOM because he's familiar with the CARICOM. But I think that first question, I really think was answered in what Richard said, you know, about creative destruction, because it was asking exactly that, you know, what do we do? So I think we could just go with the second one. Okay. What do you think, Richard? I believe that was answered.
Well, just one little point on that is this, that people always have a short-term understanding of costs, and that's a dangerous thing. That is a dangerous thing in economic terms and in overall sustainable development terms. I discussed with you the history of Haiti and how it got to where it's at. It is because there was a lack of vision. The short-term answer to everything, they chop down tree, we need food now, chop down the tree, burn up the forest, you understand? But long-term, look where Haiti is today. So we must not confuse costs with only the short-term part of it. We must see the long-term part of it. And I will argue that if you're dealing with sustainable development and the long-term survival of the Caribbean, to pay $2 more today so that you will save $400 later down the road, it's better than to pay 20 cents today and down the road you have nothing. That to me is common sense. So that is in relation to costs.
How do you see the CARICOM, according to that last question? How do you see CARICOM featuring in this?
Well, I think CARICOM is fundamental to the whole thing, but may I go back just to say this? Trinidad and Tobago, I want to address Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago had established a green fund, right, which was supposed to finance a lot of the environmentalist things in Trinidad and Tobago.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that CARICOM had then looked at the fund and said, you know what, this is what everybody else should do. You understand what I'm saying? This is what everybody else, I know this for a fact. From inside, I got this from CARICOM, that they said, look, this green fund business that Trinidad has come up with is an excellent idea. And this is what the Caribbean should do. Now, why did I begin there? I began there by saying this, that CARICOM understands very clearly that the issue of the environment, now, they didn't understand it before. They only understand it before from a standpoint of health. I don't know if you know of CEHI, the Caribbean Environmental Health Institute,
yes,
which is based in St. Lucia. Okay? Now, so they only link the environment to health. They never link the environment to everything else. Now, I think I answered the question earlier, but I will now make it a little bit clearer. I earlier said this, CARICOM put the cart before the horse by establishing only an economic space and not an environmental space. It is fundamental that CARICOM drives the process, and drives the process by doing 4 things. The first is that we must now have clearly established principles as behavior, common behavior for the entire Caribbean, okay, as regards the environment. As you know, we have the CCJ, which is the Caribbean Court of Justice, okay, which will now be, well, which should become the supreme body. And in the same way, we need to establish the universal principles that is for everybody. That's the first thing we need to do. The second thing we need to do is to establish what I have already said, a common environmental space. You cannot have sustainable development in the region and with only a common economic space. There must be a common environmental space. That's the second. The third is what Valerie and her team is doing, but which has got to be pushed regionally. The awareness raising, the education has got to be a regional program. It could come through CARICOM and the University of the West Indies, CARICOM using the other universities, University of Trinidad and Tobago, and so on and so forth. But it has to be government policy at the regional level. That's the third important factor. The fourth, I think, is where CARICOM could help the region as a whole, in the broader sense that when we face the rest of the world, we do not face the rest of the world individually, but we face the rest of the world as a united body. Because we are all small. Even Trinidad with its oil, or Jamaica with its 2 million population, is small in comparison to a place like Germany, okay? Or it's small in comparison to a place like Spain or whatever. And believe it or not, our contribution to environmental degradation is far less than the consequences we receive from it, okay? And therefore, it is within our interest that the Caribbean become a united voice. And CARICOM is where that begins when we speak to the rest of the world on this issue of our sustainable development.
You know, as this CARICOM issue, if I may just say something very quickly, 2 important things I forgot. It's not just the fact that it's 2 areas where UTT is working. I forgot the whole issue of law and policy, which happens to be one of the Sustainable Development Goals to, I think, number 15. And one of the things, when you start to get to a state level and you talk about CARICOM and things like that, you have to understand the whole development of environmental policies, the enforcement of laws which come out of those policies. That's another area that we're working on in the Environmental Studies Department, looking at how policies are developed in Trinidad and Tobago, environmental policies, what is the process they go through, and optimizing them, because a lot of these policies are not evidence-based. When you're not developing evidence-based laws, when you're not having buy-in from the public, or even if your policy is targeted at industry, if you don't optimize the rollout of that policy, not just in terms of its components, but in terms of its implementation and the making sure that compliance is in there, you have a problem. So that is another area in which we have what I hope will be a doctoral project in looking at the whole business about developing in Trinidad and Tobago And then again in the Caribbean region, evidence-based policies. Because whenever you have a Caribbean organization like CARICOM or state organization and action has to be taken at that level, then they have to talk a language which everybody understands. Or else, again, we don't have that inclusion about which Richard spoke. One more thing I wanted to mention just quickly. I forgot environmentally sensitive areas. Places like the River Swamp, places like the Caroni. The Caroni breaks my heart. It is so filthy. As an undergraduate at UWI, it was mandatory for us to go out with Winston Nana in the Caroni Swamp. The beauty of it. Now you see everything floating in the Caroni. I get goosebumps just thinking about how awful it is. Well, the river is one of our biggest swamps. It's what is called an environmentally sensitive area. Last year, we saw what happened on Manzanilla Road, where the river broke its banks and the swamp joined up with the swamp and the road just became completely destroyed. The people in Mayaro were cut off. Well, it turns out that that may have happened because a landowner blocked the path of the river. But it just shows that nature will find its way. But here's the thing, the River Swamp is so rich in nutrients that we had the biggest chip in size and in quantity, the biggest bunch of chip along Manzanilla Mayaro stretch. You can just go and pick it up. As a child, I dumped chip out of the sand, you make soup, men think of it as an aphrodisiac, etc. But it's edible. And when the swamp, so it tells you what happens. Now we have rice farmers, watermelon, we have people going into the river swamp and oysters, crabs, whatever. And here is another part of the Sustainable Development Goals. When you have an ESA, it's very important to have economic stability as well. You cannot just go and tell those people, you have to stop what you're doing because it's going to pollute the swamp. So one of the projects we have going is about looking at essentially sustainable economic activity within an environmentally sensitive area. How can they coexist? Yeah. All of these people that you can't just say, stop what you're doing. It provides life for them. And I suspect it was meant to. It was meant to do that. You know, it's also enjoyable, but that massive swamp there, when you think of what it does, it's a massive, almost fresh water, which is rare swamp. You know, it's usually like brackish. The mangroves are usually brackish. This one is only brackish near the sea. So it was meant to be for us. So there is a way, and this is the other thing that we have to consider. It's not exactly creative destruction, but is you have to coexist, and maybe you will, you know, press against the environment a little bit. But if you keep thinking it was there for me, again, you're going to do what is optimal. To paraphrase what Richard said earlier, high tide raises all boats when he was talking about competitive versus collaborative. When he took up on that, high tide raises all boats. So this is one of the reasons why it is to be collaborative, to develop in a coexisting fashion. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention those two both because they're UTT projects and because they're also important in the discussion.
Okay, thank you so much. So unfortunately, we're out of time, but Dr. Baron Cox, I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to say in closing to us. Your microphone. Yeah.
What I want to say, I have to say three things I want to say. The first is to you and to Professor Valerie Stout. I think a lot of the work that you are doing, both of you are wonderful, and this is where we need to go. I do think that even if Professor Valerie Stout and her team are able to answer many of the fundamental questions, scientifically speaking, until we share this with the public, until we can get the public to understand that sustainable development is not a political construct that has to do with the government and has to do with with the intellectual know-it-all or the bureaucrats like myself. But sustainable development is the business of each and every one of us, as she has outlined earlier. Until we get there, to be honest with you, we're spinning top in mud, as old people would say. You know, we are not going anywhere. And so I'm saying that to say this, that I would want to encourage both yourself and Professor Valerie Stout to continue with the awareness part of it, the education part of it, bringing the public into it. You know, one of my favorite politicians, not because he's a politician, but because he's an intellectual and a great historical figure, was Dr. Eric Williams. And one of the great things that Dr. Eric Williams did was something called the University of Woodford Square. I don't know if you all know of this, but this was where how Eric involved the people into the politics and into the future of the country. In the same way, we must now involve the people into the sustainable development issue. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that we have to understand, I think, to be honest with you, this sustainable development issue and the sustainable development of the Caribbean has remained a sort of atmospheric thing removed from the people. And it is our job to get the people voice into this. And so therefore, my encouragement is that the CSOs and the NGOs and the universities and so on get involved into this public square. Until that is done, we still have a serious problem here. And I'm deadly serious about this. This is one of the things that we have to be certain about. We have to go about this sustainable development business now in terms of making it a people-centered thing. And the final thing I want to say is this. I have always seen the Caribbean as belonging to me. I've never seen myself as Barbadian or Vincentian or, you know, I've seen myself as a Caribbean person. I am deeply convinced now that the future of the Caribbean as a whole, regardless of whether you have a unity state or you do not have a unitary state, the future of the Caribbean depends on us acting in unison, acting as one people. And this is where we have to go. If we do not do this, our quest for sustainable development will not be achieved. It is more than time that we come to understand a simple truth. Look at Trinidad and Tobago. Let us take this country. Let's just not take any other one. Let's just take Trinidad and Tobago alone, all by itself. If you consider that from 1961-62 to now, that country could be classified as a country that has suffered from its own success. There are too many cars on the roads, you know. The wealth of the country is eating up the country, okay? And unless we have in place today, now, not tomorrow, not next week, unless we have in place now a universal set of principles and rules that binds all of us, not just Trinidad, you understand? Trinidad would go its own way as it's going now, but outside of a community which depends on Trinidad and which Trinidad depends upon. My point is this: we cannot be indifferent to this country's own success destroying it. You understand what I'm saying? We cannot do this. We have to all get involved in this process as one body, as one set of people. Until we do that, we're in trouble. So those are the three points I wanted to make. And just to say that I'm always at the service of the people of the Caribbean. You can call on me anytime. I am prepared to do what is required. Thank you for having me. It was a great honor and a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And Professor Stout,
Great seeing you, Richard.
would you like to say anything?
Yes,
Well,
well, Richard has put it very eloquently. Now I want to be very basic. Recycle, repurpose. 2 more UTT projects, incidentally. But you know, when we have these 3 and 4 cell phones and we abandon them, we have to go somewhere. E-waste is a big problem in Trinidad. We have, as I was telling you earlier, a 1.4 cell phone penetration. That is 1.4 cell phones for every single man, woman, and child in Trinidad and Tobago. And a lot of the men, women, and children don't use cell phones. So it means others have multiple. So one of the things we can do on an individual scale is recycling. We need to start recycling our plastics, even our paper, you know, as well as we need to be repurposing some things. There are some people who are environmentally conscious who do not go to the supermarket unless they take a reusable bag and will not use a plastic bag. But we do have some people who are making biodegradable plastic bags. Kudos to them, biodegradable bottles, etc. And this is a step in the right direction. But there are lots of things we could do. New York State has banned styrofoam. I think it's time we do as well. You know, take your plastic containers. As a child, we used to take a Pyrex dish and something to this institution. It used to provide like a bowl of rice and a bowl of chow mein, and you go and you fill it up and then you take it home and it feeds the family. And there was no styrofoam, no, you know, cardboard. You sent your dishes and you collected it. So maybe we have to start thinking about how we can keep some of this out. As I said, right now we are doing a recycling project, especially with waste cooking oil and other things like e-waste, our used tires. Richard mentioned the cars on the road. Because of our roll-on, roll-off situation here, we get a lot of waste in the form of old batteries, which of course are put into the cars when the cars are sent here, and tires. So as soon as you buy a roll-on, roll-off car, the first thing you have to do is change the tires and change the battery. And that goes into our environment. So there are lots of things, ways that we could, you know, repurpose this. And one of the things that we had started thinking of, it's only on the drawing board, is setting up a plant to deal with recycled tires. But that, of course, is a long way off. It started off as a master's project, and we need time and energy to build it up. But right now, I will end with, on an individual basis, recycle, repurpose, avoid using when you can. And that's it in essence. I support every single thing Richard said. He brought home to us the what ifs, you know, which are no longer even what ifs, they're certainties. So we know what will happen if we don't take action now. And I agree on the collaboration. I agree on the individual effort. There needs to be an individual effort, as well as there needs to be a cohesive state effort and regional effort, you know. But I think that's it. So.
And just on the recycling, so I know that at some universities they have these large bins where it's easy
We do,
to put
yes, yeah, we do.
But
where does it go after?
But for persons at home, I mean, those bins or recycle bins and
those bins are very expensive. So people at home can put their, you see, I was telling you earlier about waste to energy. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why we are not a good waste to energy prospect is because our landfills are not set up for it. If you want to use, when you pass a landfill and you smell that awful smell, it's really methane and hydrogen sulfide, which is like the rotten egg scent. Mm-hmm. And that's the scent that we are getting all into Woodbrook, into Cocorite, even from the Beetham dump. But that methane is energy, landfill gas that could be captured, unfortunately, not by us. Because in order to capture that, we need to start from home and separate our organics from our plastics and our bottles and garbage. And because to produce that in a structured way, we need to have a compartmentalized area of the landfill where that could be organic waste could be put and be allowed to develop in an atmosphere without oxygen. So we're not really set up for that. Yeah. So when we see all of these waste to energy projects, they really end up being pie in the sky, you know, because that is what is needed. This is something that we are also investigating, but again, in a socio-environmental way. how willing will people be to partition their garbage, their household garbage? And that puts me in mind of another UTT project in our crop sciences area, composting. So the same scientist who is looking at the sargassum, he's also into composting. And composting now is a good thing because it produces a natural fertilizer. So when you take your banana peels and your this and your grass, even grass, you know, when you see people cut the grass on the side, and you put that in a compost heap with some sort of microorganism, it could be an earthworm, it could be whatever. What you do is you get good stuff to go and fertilize. So that all of those commercial fertilizers, all the nitrates and the phosphates that go into our rivers, and that probably cause this proliferation of weed, like you said, sargassum, seaweed, which washed up on the beaches last year, and some of it I think is now in Togo. So this is where we see the cyclical nature of this advancement, this sustainable development, this cross-sectoral impact. So it is another argument for collaboration among industries. You know, there are some people in the up in the Verdon Vale area where we have chicken farms and Christophine farms and things like that, and the quarry dust is sent to them, and they use that as a fertilizer. So that stops some of that quarry dust from going into the atmosphere, and it stops them from buying nitrates and phosphates and fertilizers and things like that. So again, we can also have that intersector collaboration as well as the national collaboration, but we're seeing all of the clues that it has to be done together. So on that note, I will end.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm going to do, because we have received quite a few questions or comments for more information on how we can dispose batteries, plastics, what I'm going to do after this is send out an email with the video, the webinar recording, and some more information on maybe the projects, also what's going on at the UNCCD. We have the just 1 second. There's a marketplace. Professor Dr. Byron Cox, I can share some of your information that you shared with me earlier, and that way we'll be able to get that information out because we are out of time.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you so much to both of our speakers.
It's my pleasure.
For being here today. Thank you to our audience for staying with us, for sending in your questions, your comments, remarks, and do continue to keep updated with on our website, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well, where you can view all of the webinar recordings. Look out for the email. If you haven't provided your email, be sure to do so, and you will get the information. So thank you again, and do have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Richard.
All right, I'll talk to you, Valerie.
Okay. Well.